But if I lay down and I play dead and I stay dead, baby, you'll get sick of being the monster out of my head, under my bed, think you're something.
Hi, welcome. I'm very excited today because finally I'm going to get to talk about Elizabeth Costello by the South African Australian writer JM Coetzee, who happens to be one of my favorite writers. This novel came out in 2003, which is the same year that Coetzee won the Nobel Prize for Literature. As usual, you're going to find a link to this novel, to as many editions as I can possibly find, and any other books that I talk about in the description box. Now, if you buy this book or any of the other books following my links, I will get a small commission, but it will not cost you anything extra. So that's a nice way for you to support my channel and allow me to keep making videos like this one. So today is the last Sunday of the month, but you might be watching this video later, it's okay. But today, when this video comes out, is the last Sunday in May. And there's a reason why I'm discussing this book today. It is because Elizabeth Costello was the pick for the month of May for 12 books for 2022, which I'm reviewing now on the last Sunday of every month. Now, 12 books for 2022 is a reading challenge. It's our reading challenge for this year. And in case you've landed on this video and you've never watched my videos before and don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry. You will find a link to the announcement video for this reading challenge in the description box, and also a link to the playlist where I'm uploading all the book reviews that I'm doing for this reading challenge. But remember, it is never too late for you to join the 12 books for 2022 reading challenge, because you don't have to read all the books. You can read some of the books. Even if a book you want to read I've already reviewed, it's okay. This is the internet. My videos are recorded, so you can read whichever book you choose and then go back and watch the video later. That's fine. But let's now go back to this month's pick, which is Elizabeth Costello, and let's talk about the plot with no spoilers as usual. So Elizabeth Costello, that's the name of the novel, but it's also the name of the main character in it. So who is this Elizabeth Costello? Okay, well, Elizabeth Costello is an aged, prestigious writer from Australia, okay? She's celebrated for one novel she wrote when she was young, and that novel is entitled The House on Eccles Street, which is a retelling of Ulysses by James Joyce, but from the point of view of Molly Bloom. Okay, so she wrote that book when she was younger, and that's what made her famous. But now she is a much older writer. Now, in this novel, we follow Costello as she travels around the world, giving lectures on different topics, and at some point also visiting her sister in South Africa. Now, the way this novel is structured is that whole parts of it are fragments from those lectures that Costello gives. But what's interesting about those fragments, about those lectures, is that they're taken from actual lectures and possibly essays that Coetzee has written and given himself throughout the years. So it is very easy to see Elizabeth Costello as an avatar for JM Coetzee himself, and to think that what Elizabeth Costello thinks and her ideas, and we'll get very familiar with them when we read this novel, are also Coetzee's ideas. Now, one thing that I didn't know when I read this novel, but I found out when I was researching it more, preparing to do this review, make this video, is that Elizabeth Costello as a character is also present in another book. In fact, she is also the main character in an earlier novella by Coetzee entitled The Lives of Animals, which came out in 1999, so before this one. I haven't read that one, but I'm curious to read that now. I think that novella is barely 100 pages long, but this one is not a lot longer. I mean, the paperback edition that I have, UK paperback edition that I have, only has, well, if you include the postscript, it only has 230 pages. So it's not a long novel at all by any stretch of the imagination. So let's talk a little bit about this character, Elizabeth Costello, and about her ideas and her opinions. She has ideas and she's happy to share them, even though they are not always well received by her audience, by fellow writers. and particularly by people who are close to her, such as her daughter-in-law and her sister. She gets paid to talk about her ideas, but it's interesting that people who are relatively close to her, at least have family ties with her, like her son's wife and also her sister, are the ones who confront her the more, but other characters also confront her. Now, she's not particularly close to her daughter-in-law, and she's not particularly close to her sister either. I think those characters find Elizabeth Costello and her ideas a little bit off-putting. I didn't particularly. I don't know if you did. Now, as I said, some characters confront Elizabeth Costello in this novel, and sometimes that happens rather publicly, which is a little bit cringe-worthy at times. Something that I love about this novel, which happens very early on, is how her son, John, who is an academic, sees Elizabeth Costello and how he describes her. So there's something here on page 3 in my edition. So the he is John and the she is Elizabeth Costello, okay? He thinks of her as a seal, an old, tired circus seal. One more time, she must heave herself up onto the top. One more time, show that she can balance the ball on her nose. Up to him to coax her, put heart in her, get her through the performance. So here he's talking about her not as a mother, not as a person, not as a writer, but as someone who goes and performs publicly, someone who has to give her opinions and give lectures. So in this novel, we follow Elizabeth Costello from conference to radio interviews. She even takes us on a cruise where she has been invited to talk about literature with the passengers. Now, she is a celebrity writer, that's clear. She's more a celebrity than a writer at this point because her fame comes from a book she wrote decades ago. So this novel is a fantastic insight. It's a fantastic look on the life of a celebrity writer. And that's fascinating because we can see how irritating being a famous writer can be. And that is something that JM Coetzee certainly has experience in. I have to say, if you haven't read this novel yet, just a bit warning, this novel is very fragmentary, I know that not everyone loves that. So each chapter is about a specific episode in Elizabeth's later life. I quite like the structure, but I don't think it will be for everyone. Also because there is not always a clear link between the different chapters, most notably in the final parts of the novel. But what we do get in this novel are Elizabeth Costello's opinions and long explanations about how she holds them, why she thinks what she thinks, her arguments. Sometimes we get that in the form of lectures, as I said, so we just go and read her lecture notes. But other times we get familiar with her ideas through a dialogue, so conversations that she has with other characters who confront her. She holds very personal views on animal rights, which some people in the novel, some of the characters in the novel see as radical. And her opinions on animal rights, not really her opinions about animal rights, but something she says about that, cause a minor controversy in the novel because she compares the Holocaust to the treatment of animals today. She would claim that her words are taken out of context and misconstrued, but the beauty is that in the novel you can see exactly the context in which she says that. So it's up for you to decide if that was a good comparison or not, or whether she was even really comparing that. If I had to define Elizabeth Costello, the character, not the novel, with one word, with one personality trait, I would say that she's fierce. Now, I did not agree with everything she says in the novel, but her arguments were solid, I thought. I have never read a novel like this before, a novel with a character like this before. One thing that I was looking forward to but actually didn't get in this novel, but it's my fault, I don't know why I had that expectation, was that there would be stuff here about Australia. JM Coetzee was born and raised in South Africa, but then later in life he moved to Australia. He also lived in the US and in England at different points in his life. But he now lives in Australia and he has become a dual national, so he is binational, South African and Australian. And this was, I think, this is the first novel he wrote after he moved to Australia. So with that in mind and the fact that the main character is an Australian writer, I thought there would be a lot about Australia here. And there is stuff about Australia here, but there is a lot more about Africa and even African literature in this novel than about Australia or Australian literature. Now, most of this novel takes place in the US and in South Africa as well. Very little of this novel takes place in Australia, which I found surprising, but that's because I had already created this expectation in my mind. I think the only time we hear about Australia is in the form of a flashback to an encounter that Elizabeth Costello had with an older man when she was younger. And that's interesting. It was interesting to see what the younger Elizabeth Costello was like, because mostly we get her in old age, living off the success of her early novel, the novel about Molly Bloom. But what has she done since? You know, her daughter-in-law is happy to expose her at some point and expose the flaws in her argument about animal rights. And she does it publicly. But I guess that, you know, when you speak publicly, you need to be open to that. You need to be open to that kind of response, feedback, criticism. The problem is that it's her son's wife who does it. And that made me feel really uncomfortable. I thought that was unfair on Elizabeth. Elizabeth Costello, the writer, the character here, strikes me as a lonely woman with a rather desolate life despite her fame, or perhaps in part because of her fame. So I find this novel to be touching, sad, beautiful, slightly confusing, and thought-provoking, which is quite something. I don't think Elizabeth Costello is the best novel to start with Coetzee. I say that if you've never read anything by this author and you're tempted to read this, you can, you'll probably enjoy it. I did. But I think that if you want to read Coetzee and you've never done so before, I would recommend Disgrace instead, which is a novel I have reviewed here on my channel, and you will find a link to that review in the description box as well. But if you are a Coetzee fan, like I am, I think you need to read this novel. Okay, so Elizabeth Costello was our pick for May for our 12 books for 2022 reading challenge. So what are we going to be reading in June? Well, I'm going to be reading, and we are going to be reading, I hope you will be reading this along with me, is Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively. Now, this is an English novel. It came out, I want to say that it came out in the 80s. Yeah, in the late 1980s. I've read it before. I had this old secondhand copy that was falling apart, so I got rid of it. I don't remember much of it. I don't remember my reading experience, so that's why I thought it would be a good idea to reread it this year and read it with you. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this, and I will see you again next month on the last Sunday of the month. Remember, last Sunday in June, we'll be discussing Moon Tiger, but in the meantime, there will be plenty of other videos and other book reviews here on my channel, so I hope to see you on those as well. Take care.